Hey everyone, my name is Rooster and welcome back to Mechabellum. This is going to be the second video in the unit counter series. If you haven't watched the first one, I would recommend that you check that out. In this one, it's going to work similarly. We're going to go through all of the medium-sized units. These are going to be all the medium-sized units from 100 cost to the 300 costs. The giants I will leave for a third video. And I will just give you guys my opinions. So the best units to counter a given mech are going to be in the S tier column, with the OK counters in the B tier. I will give a little bit of feedback as well, depending on certain techs or matchups, if I think that it is valuable information. And then the final thing, you might not see a certain unit that you believe to be a counter. If you don't see it, it's not because I don't think it's a counter, but it's because I think that it might be too niche or too specific to get into. So I'm trying to give you guys the best counters, in my opinion, the things that work in almost all of the games, rather than certain very limited scenarios. Alright, let's get into it. We're going to start off with the Arclight. And so with the Arclight, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have your chaff counters. You're going to have shielded fangs and loose formation crawlers. Both of those work exceptionally well against the Arclight. It doesn't really have massive splash, so it struggles to deal with either of them. Marksman is going to be your 100 cost unit of choice if you're looking for some DPS. It outranges the Arclight, and it tends to have enough DPS to take them down. Plus, it scales really well, so it's kind of the core counter unit to Arclight. Sabertooth works well as well in the 200 cost category. It is very good against large hit point single targets, and that's exactly what the Arclight is. It's also tanky enough that the Arclight can't really fight back against it. Phoenix is fantastic. It's like the Marksman, but flying, so potentially even better. Very, very strong. Hackers work well too. They can take over the Arclights. Hackers are generally good into most medium-sized units, so we will be seeing more of them as well. And then in the giant category, you're going to see fortresses, which perform very, very well against this unit. You're going to find Raiden and, of course, War Factory. All of these do well into medium-sized stuff. And so, yeah, the Arclight tends to not have a great time facing them. In the B tier, I'm going to be mentioning Stormcallers. They can be useful, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on them alone to deal with Arclights, but they can get the job done. Wasps are mentioned here because sometimes the ground may be getting out of control, and then Wasp can be a useful chaff unit that the Arclight can't easily deal with. Most people won't be running anti-air, and so I think Wasp here can work nicely. Yeah, that's kind of why I put it there. Farseer is an okay option, will generally not work in the long run, but can be good in the mid game. Scorpions are also like kind of fine. They're not meant to deal with Arclights. They're a bit too expensive, but can work. Worms will be in here as well, alongside Overlords. They do really well against Arclights. Arclights can't fight back against them, but I think that they clear Arclights a little bit slower than the other giants we mentioned, and so that's why you will find them in the B tier. Alright, that's Arclight done. Let's move on to the Marksman. And so for the Marksman, this is what it looks like. Again, chaff here is going to be very useful. Of course, shielded fangs are even better, but both normal crawlers and normal fangs are a nightmare for Marksman to deal with, so they're very good distraction options. In terms of DPS, you're going to find the Marksman. Yes, it's a bit of a weird one, but this is a unit that you can mirror into, and it just performs really well into itself because it is the longest range unit that we have, at least with the base range. Now, Wasp is in here as well. Again, fantastic air counter, air chaff, bit like Fang or Crawler. Comes in a big pack, so hard to deal with for Marksman. Worm is going to go in here as well. The nice thing about Sandworm is that it doesn't care about how much range you have. It will be untargetable while it's traveling, and so it can close the distance and kind of start brawling close to a Marksman, which is something they really don't like. Factory I'm going to put in here as well, because Marksmen tend to not have the best DPS unless they are really over-leveled, but Factory or even level 2 Factory can be a very nice gut shot to deal with a board that is mostly relying on Marksmen for their DPS. In the B tier column, you're going to find a bunch of kind of tanks, stuff that can stall Marksmen, so Hound will be in there. Takes a while for a Marksman to get through. Same thing with Sledgehammer. They can't one-shot them at same level, and so that means it takes a while to get through a pack of Sledgehammers, and they tend to perform pretty well. Obviously, if the Marksman is really over-leveled, then buying a level 1 Sledgehammer is not going to do anything, But if you're kind of even, then same level against same level, Sledgehammer will perform well. Mustang is in here as well, can do pretty nicely. It does get outranged, but again, it's a somewhat small unit, kind of chaff-like, so Marksman can't really fight back that well either. Stormcaller, kind of same thing as Arclight, can do well, will eventually get outranged, so it's good in like the early mid-game, tends to fall off late. Phoenix I will put in here as well. Again, it's okay, it does get outranged in the long run, but if you're playing aggro, or even in standard sometimes, it can kind of be fine, right up until you get into the very late game, and then typically the Phoenix get outscaled. Fortress is in here as well, alongside Raiden. I think Fortress can do quite well, of course, not in a long-range scenario, but close range, it'll do just fine. It's typically too tanky for a Marksman to take out, so yeah, good option. I just put it in B because I don't think it does that well in a very long-range scenario. And Raiden is kind of the same. Raiden does well in the short-range scenario typically. The way that it targets can just allow it to sometimes get rid of Marksman in the backline because it's always looking for multiple targets to hit. And yeah, that's why I have it here. Of course, it's a tricky matchup. AA Marksman does exist, so that's kind of why it's in the OK tier. Alright, let's move on to the next unit. And that will be Sledgehammer. Now for Sledgehammer, the things are going to look a little bit similar to, for instance, the Arclight. Again, loose formation crawlers and shielded fangs are here. Sledgehammers are kind of pseudo chaff clear, but they start performing really poorly when you click these two techs, and so they are fantastic options to stall a Sledgehammer board. Phoenix will be in there. It's a higher DPS option than Marksman, and so it tends to do a little bit better. Also, it's an air unit, so the Sledgehammers can't fight back. Scorpion will be in there as pretty much like the counter to Sledgehammer, at least intended counter. This is exactly what it loves to fight, these kind of mid-sized packs of units that include like 5-ish mechs. So Scorpion will go in there. Raiden, kind of the air Scorpion of this game, does really well into them as well. Fortress loves medium-sized units, just like Arclights, will do really well into Sledgehammer. Scorch Vulcan will show up here as well. It does like to deal with mid-sized units, but you have to click the Scorch. But once you do, it can pretty much deal with any type of threat that it's facing in terms of Sledgehammers. Worm will go in here as well. Kind of a similar story. It's like a Fortress, but close range. Does really well into Sledgehammers. And then Factory, same thing. Loves to shoot at mid-sized targets and too tanky to kill. In the B tier column, or well, the OK counters, you'll find Marksman. Again, same thing as in the Marksman thing. It can do alright into Sledgehammers, but it has to be a level up, typically, to do well. If that is not the case, the Marksman will struggle, and then they don't perform too well. Farseer does okay in the early to mid game, but can struggle later on. It's not really a safe long-term counter, and so that's why I put it over here. Multi-Melter is a fantastic counter if your opponent is pushing into you in a short-range scenario, but it's not great if your opponent is playing a long-range game because, well, your melters are just going to get outranged, EMP'd, whatever you may have. And then Overlord will go in there as well. It is good, but it's expensive, and it can miss the Sledgehammers. I don't think it's the most efficient at dealing with Sledgehammer packs, at least not like the Raiden is, and so that's why I put it in the OK column for those reasons. Let's move on. Stormcallers. Here we're going to be seeing crawlers only. I didn't put Fang in there because Fangs are slow, and Stormcallers are kind of a counter to them, but the fast crawlers can make them miss their shots, and so they are quite good. They can also get underneath their gun line and start munching at the storm, so fantastic chaff option. Marksmen, I think, are a good option because they have a lot of range and they have the potential to outskill them once they get to the range tech and the elite marksman. They're also kind of annoying to hit sometimes because they're small units, and so that tends to bode well for marksmen. Stormcallers I will put in here as well. You can just mirror Stormcallers if you're in a long range scenario. Your opponent has 2, you buy 2. That's a pretty normal thing. You will often have to add other units as well, but I think it's a fine choice. Phoenix, kind of the same as Marksman, but flying. Yeah, does really well. Stormcallers can't shoot up. You kind of get the gist of it. Mustangs with Missile Interceptor I think are really powerful too. Missile Interceptor Stang is kind of the most efficient interception that we have in the game, and so it does do quite well into the storms. And then for the final units in the S column, we will have the Sandworms and the Raiden. Sandworms, again, they can close distance without being hit, and then they will often find themselves in the dead zone of the Stormcallers. So a nice option. And then Raiden is a flying unit, can't get hit, can hit multiple targets. So yeah, a good option all around. In the OK counters, we'll find Sledgehammers. I think Sledgehammers can do really well into Storms. They're somewhat too tanky for the Stormcallers to take out typically, and so they can perform well. It is a little bit tricky though. If your opponent is already very heavily invested into Storms, it can be hard to get into Sledgehammer. So that's why I put it in the OK column for now. Steelballs are a bit similar to Sledgehammers. They do come in a pack of 4 instead of 5. But what they have got going for them is their speed. So they can dodge the shots. They can also get under the gun line. And that type of pressure is something that Stormcallers don't like to deal with. I'll also put Wasps. You won't see Wasp everywhere, even though there's plenty of units they counter just because certain units can't shoot up. But here, I think that Wasps in and of themselves deal enough damage to be able to deal with Stormcallers, or as they might take too long with other mechs. The other thing, too, is that if your opponent goes Stormcallers with fire and burns the ground, then sometimes Wasp is your only good chaff option because it doesn't care, it won't burn. And then we have the Overlord. Kind of a similar story here to the previous unit that we saw, the Sledgehammer. I think it does fine into Storms, but it's not the best in a long-range scenario, and it's also quite expensive. So, yes, the Stormcallers can't shoot up, but I also think that there's units that more efficiently clear Storms than an Overlord for less money. Let's move on. Alright, here we are. Steelballs is the next unit, and you can see there is quite the list. We have Crawlers and Fangs, both as our chaff options. Steelballs are not meant to shoot at small stuff, so they will work very well to stall. You will have the Charge Shot Arclight, which does okay into other stuff, but I think it mostly benefits against Steelballs. Can definitely be worth a shot if you're struggling. Against the Steelball push and you have some Arclights, then that tech might allow you to turn the tables. Hound I will put there in there as well. It's a pack of 5, kind of like a Sledgehammer. Just something Steelballs don't really clear efficiently. Sledgehammer and Fire Badger will be in there for the same reasons. Just mid-sized units, right? Steelballs are meant to shoot at big targets, things like fortresses or melters or Vulcans, whatever you may have. They're not meant to deal with mid-sized units, and so that's why you see all of them in the S tier as a great stall option. For DPS, you will find the Phoenix has plenty of damage and comes in a pack of 2, so it deals with the pack a little bit faster than something like the Marksman, which we'll see in the B tier. Hacker is great as well, loves dealing with these. Scorpion, again, just made to deal with mid-sized unit packs, so Sledgehammers and Steelballs are its bread and butter. Scorch Vulcan shows up again, great counter against this type of stuff. Multi-Melter, I think, is a fantastic option. More so than against Sledgehammer, because you can't easily play Steelballs in a long-range fight. And so, yeah, the odds of you playing this in a short-range fight are much higher, which means that I think it's a slightly better counter. Raiden and Overlord will be in there as well. Both fantastic counters against this stuff. And then we have in the OK column, Marksman. They can work, but they sometimes may lack damage if the Steelballs level or get an item. So that's why they're in here. It's a little bit tricky to play, but it can work. Farseer is also fine, typically again in the mid game, but it's not a long-term counter. And it can also struggle if the Steelballs get too tanky. So it's fine, but wouldn't necessarily put it in S. And then we have Degen Beam Wraith. I do want to put that there because I think it does really well into pushes. And often those pushes will be including some Steelballs. I put it in OK because it's a bit tricky to play, but it's a fantastic way to deal with flanks or with an aggressive player that is using Steelballs. And yeah, the slow, the additional damage, the damage reduction, all of those effects from the Degen Beam are, yeah, very potent. Let's move on. Up next is the Tarantula, and in the S tier column you will find Stormcallers. They love shooting at big targets that don't move very fast, and that's exactly what the Spider is. So yeah, great option for the early to mid game to keep these guys honest and stop them from leveling. Sabertooth also in there. It wants to deal exactly with this type of thing, right? A big single mech with a lot of hit points, and so the Saber is a fantastic option for that too. Phoenix, again, a DPS unit of Choice, just very powerful against all of these mid-sized stuff, so you will almost see it in every single tier list at the very top. Hacker loves dealing with this stuff, and yeah, if you can manage to take them over, that's going to benefit you even more. Fortress, Sandworm, Overlord, Factory, all there for kind of the same reasons. They're very hard to deal with, they're too tanky for spiders to kill, and they dish out big damage to deal with the spiders' hit points. Moving over to the OK part of the list, we're going to see Marksman, kind of the same reason as with stuff like Sledgehammers and Balls. They can sometimes lack damage, so it's a little bit too tricky to play, in my opinion. It can work, but it's not consistent. Sledgehammers and Steelballs are in there because they can stall the spiders. If they're high level, it becomes tough, but if they're equal level, then they definitely can make sure that the spiders get stuck and don't deal with the chaff that well. Steelballs also have the added benefit of being able to kill this type of stuff. If they lock on, it's exactly what they want to try and kill. We have Rhinos in there because kind of a similar story. Spiders don't have big damage, and the Rhino deals well in close quarters combat, which is often where you'll see spiders being played. And so if they're on the flanks or whatever, then Rhinos can be a really nice option. Melter can work okay as well, both the diffraction version and the normal Melter. But it's a little bit tricky, right? If your opponent plays something like Spider Mines, then it's not ideal. And, well, you basically will only play it if the opponent's spider is so high level that you can't kill it with anything else. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a best counter. Let's go on. And here we have the Sabertooth. As for the counters, we're going to see, again, Crawlers and Fangs. Sabertooth is a big single target DPS unit with a pretty high attack interval, so it really doesn't like to deal with these smaller units. Stormcallers, kind of like with the spiders, love hitting this thing. It's not very fast, it's pretty sizable, and so they will do well to keep this thing honest in the early game. Sabertooth also shows up against Sabertooth because, well, it's exactly the type of unit that it likes to face. A large unit with quite a lot of hit points. So, yeah, Saber versus Saber is a pretty fine matchup to go for. Again, Phoenixes, we don't need to mention them again, really good. Hackers, same thing. Fortress, Overlord, and Factory, kind of the big DPS giants that we have with a reasonably high reload speed so they can switch targets, do well into this. In the B tier column, we will find Marksman, again, same reason, can have issues in terms of DPS, and so that's why I don't want to put them in S. Sledgehammers and Steelballs both can perform well, can be a little bit tricky, but at least they'll do a good job of stalling if they can't deal the damage themselves. And then Melter, kind of same reason as with Spider, I do put in here. It's more expensive than Saber, and if the Saber locks on, it can actually be a counter to Melter. So that's why I don't want to put it in S, but it can sometimes be mandatory if your opponent has, you know, a level 6 Sabertooth, then Melter becomes somewhat required to take it down. Alright, let's move on to the next unit on the list. And that will be the Rhino. Now, the Rhino does struggle a bit. It's a pretty niche unit, but what exactly are its counters? Well, first and foremost, we are going to be mentioning Steelballs. These guys are almost always going to perform well into the Rhinos. They're like 4 mini melters, so they're much harder to kill. They're also easier to kind of get all across the board if your opponent is going for a heavy Rhino investment. And so that's why it's a unit of choice against this. Sabertooth also can work great, has access to that very cheap double shot, loves to deal with these bigger units, and yeah, just a solid counter overall. Phoenix, also fantastic. Hackers, amazing. They will ignore stuff like photon coating. They've got access to things like EMP. You can take over the Rhino. Maybe the opponent's board can't deal with it. It's just a fantastic unit to try and deal with Rhinos if you want to give it a shot. Fortress, I think, very capable. Shoots relatively fast. Unless the Rhino is like really over leveled, the Fortresses should do fine. Overlord is a bit similar. It's an air unit, so be a bit careful about your towers, but it should have the DPS to take Rhinos down. And then we have, finally, the War Factory, kind of the big DPS unit of choice if nothing else works. In the B tier, we will find Chaff. I put them in the B because Rhinos do have access to Whirlwind, which makes them quite good at chaff clearing. So I didn't want to put them up in S, but they are quite useful to try and stall Rhinos from getting to your towers. And then Melter is there again. It's a bit harder to spam than something like the Steelballs. And so, yeah, if you're dealing with Rhino threats all over the board, sometimes Melter won't be enough. But if it's a singular, really high-level Rhino, then sometimes Melter will be required. Let's move on. And here we have the Hacker. Now, against Hacker, you typically want to be building Crawlers. These guys are a bit faster, and so they can kind of get underneath the Hacker. On top of that, often Hackers will be paired up with Mustang, and Mustang aren't good into Crawler. So that's why typically just small stuff that you don't mind getting hacked is easy to take care of. If it does get taken over, will just do very well. Marksman I will put in here. They've got more range than Hackers. They're also not necessarily that valuable to take over. Both of those things make them quite decent into Hacker. Mustang is a fantastic option, kind of my unit of choice, because they'll deal enough damage to deal with Hackers, and at the same time, they're not the most valuable to hack. So they're often going to be a really good unit to try and deal with these guys. Phoenix, again, air units can't get hacked. You get the gist of it. Also has enough DPS to take down anything that might get taken over on your end. Stormcallers, they've got more range than Hackers. They can deal with the barriers if they come out. Just overall a decent option. And then we have the Giants. We've got Fortress because of the barrier that you can click, but also because they can be a little bit too tanky to take over sometimes. And then the two Air Giants with the Raiden and the Overlord. Raiden is fantastic, does really good damage against shields, can hit multiple targets, which means that it might not get fully distracted by whatever gets taken over. And Overlord is kind of the same, just really good DPS, can't get targeted, and yeah, just does well overall against the Hackers. Then in the B column, we will find Fang. I didn't put it in A like the Crawler because it's not very fast, so it doesn't pressure the Hacker too much. And often this does make a difference. I think Crawlers just are better because they're fast. We will also have the Sandworm, which can be tricky because it can get hacked. But if it manages to keep unburrowing and burrowing, it will keep resetting this hacking from this unit. And that can be a pretty decent counter. Factory is in there as well. That might be up in S tier, but it's really expensive. And so I think that typically it's not going to be the only thing that you buy. You're going to need to buy other counters first before you try and go for a Factory gut shot, which is typically what it's going to be, just because Factory is too tanky to hack most of the time. Yeah, that's kind of it. All right, let's move on to the Phoenixes. Now for Phoenixes, the list isn't quite as big. We are going to find in the S tier Fangs. Phoenixes don't like shooting at small stuff. It's not what they're meant to do. They're DPS units, so both chaff options here are good. But I think Fangs are slightly better because they can hit air units, and so they can sometimes take down Phoenixes too. Marksman is going to be a decent counter too. Oftentimes going to be one of the only options that you have in the early game, and can work just fine. Has really good late game scaling, better than the Phoenix, so will typically win that, and has some good techs as well with the anti-air, with double shot against potential shields. It's just kind of the classic counter to Phoenixes. Mustang also great option. Again, a small unit that can also shoot up. It's like a bigger version of a Fang, kind of, and does really well into Phoenixes most of the time. You can also just mirror this unit into itself, which is something that happens a lot. Also at the Heimamars, both players pick up a Phoenix, and you just hope that you win the ground and then take out the enemy Phoenix first. Wasp is a good option too. Same reason as the other chaff, annoying to deal with for the Phoenix. In the B tier, you will find Crawler. I just put it below Fang because, again, it can't shoot up. Even though I think it is very useful against Phoenixes, I wanted to make a little bit of a distinction between Fang and Crawler. Farseer is a great option in the early to mid game, but I wouldn't rely on it in the long run. So that's why it's going to find its way here as well. Raiden can sometimes work out because of the way that it targets. So it sometimes will find itself in a position where it like snipes multiple Phoenixes with its lightning beams. But it's a bit tricky, right? If it's really high-level Phoenixes, then the Phoenixes might also take out the Raiden, so that's why I wanted to put it here. And then finally, we'll have Fortress Anti-Air. This can be one of the best counters in the game, but it can also not work out, and I think it is something that you don't want to rely on exclusively. So it's good to go for Fortress Anti-Air against Phoenix, but you will typically still want some backup from a Marksman, some Phoenixes, some Mustang, whatever it may be, in case a couple Mustang do survive, or the Fortress AA gets redirected somewhere else, right? Anyway, let's move on to the next unit. And that will be the Phantom Ray. Against Phantom Ray, it's going to be a similar story against Phoenix in terms of the chaff that counters it. So Fangs are going to be in S tier here because they can shoot back at the Phantoms. These units are kind of like a Phoenix. They're also DPS units, so they don't really like dealing with small stuff. And that's why I think Fang is a fantastic option. Phoenixes are going to be a great option to take these guys down. Just good DPS unit all around. Wasps are in there as well. They're both annoying for Phantoms to kill, and they pack enough of a punch to take down Phantoms. So they're often going to be a big part of your board if you're dealing with a decent amount of Phantoms. Farseer I will actually put in S tier here because I think that it is just good almost all throughout the game. Even in the late game, Farseer will still perform pretty well into Phantom, so I wanted to put it in there. Diffract Melter is lovely against this type of stuff. Phantoms are low range, so they push in, and that means that your multi-melter lack of range isn't really a problem. Raiden, of course, meant to deal with this type of stuff. Overlord is going to be in here as well, and I'm going to mention the Abyss, which tends to do quite well into a line of Phantoms. When they all just line up next to one another, and the Abyss gets to just shoot its ray across all of them, it's somewhat scary, like how well it can perform. I wasn't quite aware of this, but it does work, so you can try it out. In the B tier column, I will put Crawlers. Again, can't shoot up, but very annoying for Phantoms to kill, so it's a good distraction. Marksman AA I will put in there. It can be enough, but if it's a heavy Phantom spam with things like the portable shield being clicked as well, sometimes Marksman won't be enough, and so that's why I want to put them in there. And then I'll also mention Missile Interceptor Mustang. Phantom Rays do shoot rockets, which means that they can get intercepted, but they also have access to things like burst mode. Your opponents can add other things to the board that can try and mess with your interception. So that's why I wanted to put it in OK. It's a fine option, but I wouldn't rely on it too much because there are tricks to try and circumvent it. Okay, next up, it will be the Wraith. Now against the Wraith, Marksman AA is a fantastic tool. It's exactly made for this type of stuff, right? It's a singular big air unit, hard to miss. The Wraith doesn't have that much range, so it's hard to protect it. And yeah, that's going to be one of your best friends in terms of counters. Phoenix also performs really well. Melters do decently. I think Raiden is a pretty decent option. Also has access to EMP, which can annoy the Wraith quite a bit. And then we have Overlord in there as well. Out of these ones, maybe Raiden could be bumped down because sometimes the Wraith might be too tanky, but I still think that it performs admirably against it, and so I wanted to give it a spot in S tier. As for the OK units, I will mention Loose Formation Crawler. Now, Wraith is one of the best chaff units we have in the game, and so it's very hard to build chaff into them. However, I think Loose Formation sometimes can work just because it spreads the crawlers over such a large area that sometimes the Wraith just can't really hit all of them. And then on top of that, it tends to not be able to make use of its inherent splash range, which does make a difference. So it's not the best, but it can help you buy those extra seconds, which may be vital to win a round. Mustang AA will be in there as well. Can do work, but if your opponent runs armor, then sometimes it doesn't. So that's why it's a little bit tricky. But if you have a high-level Mustang, it will do well into a Wraith. It does have the text to deal with it. Sledgehammers, I will put in there. Mid-sized units. Wraith is not really a DPS unit. Yes, sometimes it can become one, but most of the time it won't be. And so Sledgehammers, especially higher-level ones with health regeneration, can be really annoying for a Wraith to take out, and sometimes may be your better choice for chaff. Phantoms are a bit similar, but they can also just kill the Wraith straight up. They're annoying for the Wraith to kill, and they can fight back. I will mention Farseer as well. It's okay. It does have access to cheap EMP, which can be a problem for Wraith, but I don't think it's a solid counter in the long run, and you will often need to supplement it with something else. And then finally, I will mention Abyss. I think Abyss is tricky to play, at least at the time of recording, but it is good into bigger units, and it's definitely too big for a Wraith to kill, so I want to mention it here as a potential counter. Alright, let's move on. And this will be the Scorpion. Now, if you look at Scorpion, I will mention both Crawlers and Fangs as a decent option. Works even better with loose formation and portable shield, but not necessarily mandatory. This unit is meant to deal with mid-sized units, Sledgehammers and Steelballs for the most part. So if you manage to make it shoot at a pack of crawlers, it will take out some of them, but then it'll be stuck reloading for 4.5 seconds, and that's usually a big problem for the Scorpion player. So that's why I want to mention the chaff. Marksman here can be a good unit to counter them. You have to be a bit quick though. Maybe I should have bumped these down to B tier because they can have damage problems, especially if it's a higher level Scorpion. But in the long run, they should do well. They should outrange them. And with techs like Double Shots or Elite Marksman, you tend to be fine. It's, you know, just be a little bit wary of whether or not the Scorpions are too tanky for you to pick Marksman as your counter. Sabers are quite decent as well. They love shooting at bigger targets, and that includes Scorpions. And Scorpions are not the best at dealing with Sabers. If they're over-leveled, yes, but at equal level, Sabers tend to kind of have the edge, also for being a cheaper unit. Stormcallers, again, Scorpions are slow, big targets, easy to hit, and that means Stormcallers will do well, at least in the early to mid-game. Phoenixes will show up here again. Hackers as well will have the melting points because they do outrange the Scorpions, at least unless Siege Mode is being clicked, but I didn't want to get into that specific. That's another story. Siege Mode doesn't get clicked all that much, so I think Melter is a fine counter. And then we have Overlords as well. Big air unit, can't get hit by the Scorpions, and in return can hit this big mech quite easily. And then in the B tier, you'll find Fortress and Raiden. I think Fortress can do really well into Scorpion. It's just a bit of a tricky matchup of levels, but I think normally Fortress is a completely fine thing to play. Raiden also can be fine, but can sometimes lack the damage to get rid of the Scorpion, so that's why I wanted to put it in the OK tier. Alright, that brings us to the last 3 units that we're going to cover in this video, which are the rare units, starting with the Badger. Against Badger, Phoenix will again be a great DPS option. I will mention Armor Rhino in this one, just because of how good armor is into Badgers. They have a really low attack per Badger, like 28 as you see here at level 1, and so that means that even a level 2 Badger still can't damage a level 1 Rhino with armor, or any other unit with armor for that matter. I didn't want to list them all, but armor is fantastic against these units. Hackers are going to do well. They love dealing with mid-sized units, and so this is going to be no different. Scorpion, Raiden, again, kind of the units of choice against mid-sized units, and so they will do really well. Fortress and Scorch Vulcan, we already saw them against Sledgehammers as well, and this is basically kind of a different type of Sledgehammer. There will also be the Sandworm and the Diffraction Melter, alongside, of course, the Factory, with being the biggest kind of ground DPS Titan. And then we have the B tier. That is going to be Marksman. Again, can struggle in terms of damage, and so that's why it finds its way down there. Farseer, a fine counter against this in the early to mid game, but you will need to add something else in the long run. And then Overlord does do well against this stuff, but can sometimes struggle to take them out fast enough. So that's why I wanted to put them in the B tier. Okay, let's move on to the Typhoon. Now against Typhoon, you are going to want to build either tanky units and units that are able to deal big damage. And that's going to be the Sabers to start with. They love shooting at these guys. They only come in a pack of 2, so it doesn't really matter too much for a Sabertooth, and that's why I do want to mention them. Phoenix is going to show up again. Armor Rhino makes an appearance once more because Typhoons also don't deal a lot of damage, and some people really like to flank with them, so I think putting an Armor Rhino to deal with a flank Typhoon is a fantastic way to deal with them. Scorpions are going to be mentioned here once more. They can hit both the Typhoons at the same time, and they will take both of them out at least at same level, so that's a big plus for the Scorpion. Fortress does well. It's too tanky to take out typically for a Typhoon, and it does dish out damage at a nice pace. Diffraction Melter I will mention here too. It just does well into mid-sized stuff, and Typhoons will often be used in a push, so defensively Diffraction Melter is amazing. I think Sandworms are great too, alongside Raiden, Overlord, and Factory. We've talked about them before, so I'm not going to go into too many specifics, but yeah, they do well into this type of stuff. Then in the OK column, I will mention crawlers. Typhoons deal a bit more damage than Mustang, but they can still struggle into crawlers, especially if those crawlers have levels in something like Subterranean Blitz. And then I will also mention Sledgehammers and Fire Badgers. Both of those can be a little bit tanky and annoying to deal with. Sledgehammers do have access to armor potentially. Fire Badgers can get field maintenance. If they have some levels, then Typhoons aren't the best way to take them out, and that can just be a nice stalling option. Alright, final unit on the list, the Farseer. And here we have it, the Disco Truck. Now, as for its counters, Mustang Missile Intercept is going to make an appearance once more because the Farseer does shoot missiles, so if you can intercept those, then the unit is kind of useless. And that's why I think it's a solid counter. We also have Sabertooth once more. Sabers love shooting at bigger units, and that's exactly what Farseer is. Phoenix I will put there as well. It can be a tricky matchup, but Phoenixes also do dish out enough DPS to take these guys down, so I think it's a fine option to go with. We will put Fortress in there. Too tanky to kill, but has plenty of damage to get rid of a Farseer. Same story for the Sandworm, the Overlord, and the War Factory. Then in the B tier, we'll put Chaff. Farseer does a bit of everything, but it's not the king of a particular job either, and that means it can struggle dealing with Chaff efficiently, and so Crawlers and Fangs will be nice to stall them. Marksman can be fine, but they kind of need a level, as with the other units that we've seen. If you have levels on your Marksman, then they'll do really well into Farseer. If not, then maybe you need something else. Stormcaller I will mention as well. It can work. Farseer are decently easy to hit, even though they can move at 60 meters a second, but it's a little bit tricky. Also, they can get intercepted, so yeah, I don't know. It's a fine option, but you will probably need something else. Alright, that brings us to the end of this video. It's quite a longer one, I know, but at least we managed to cover all the medium-sized units. I'll be making another video as well about the Giants, and then we'll at least have covered everything. Again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you didn't see a particular counter to a unit, that's probably just because I don't think it's a very good answer, generally speaking. So don't be afraid. If it works for you, keep playing it. These are just kind of my general recommendations. If you like the video, please leave a thumbs up. If you want to stay up to date with the latest content, please consider subscribing. And if you want to see me play live, check me out on Twitch. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.